to our snowy Student Scholar Day presentations. A special welcome to some guests from the sand dunes. We're so happy you're here. And of course, the Board of Trustees and President Savaldi. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Rob Benson and his students.
Thank you again for coming today. This is always a huge thing for us to be able to showcase what our students do. Ms. Williams and Mr. these guys, Ms. Schultz and Mr. Williams, have done a lot of original research and a lot of thought-provoking sorts of things to do. They've looked at some geological issues that they came across out of the sand dunes, and are trying to bring a lot of interesting observations into really the great story that geology tends to tell us we sometimes overlook. So, it's up to you guys. Lead us into the future.
Thank you. So thanks again for being here, cold, snowy, traveling far distances. I'm Katie, Miss Schultz, and Adam. We're going to talk about water and soils today at the Great Sand Dunes. Oh no. Oh no.
Click on the slide.
Click on the slide. Okay, manual labor here. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about the inspiration for my research and what led into all my research, because it's a big deal. This is my first time doing this. I'm going to explain what groundwater sapping is, the geographic setting of where Little Spring Creek is, my initial approach, my methods, and then Adam and I are going to be doing a joint discussion and conclusion to tie in our soils and our water and some archaeological artifacts that we saw out at the dunes. Firstly, my inspiration came from so many different sources, mainly working with researchers from the Smithsonian, from the School of Mines, and I got envious. I really wanted to do my own research. The scientists that came to the dunes were so passionate about what they did and what they were doing, and I really, really wanted to do that it's exciting, it's fun stuff, and I got an internship through the Geological Society of America through GeoCorps, and they pair with the Park Service, Forest Service, BLM land to give opportunities for internships for students and non-students alike. And I also want to thank Zapata Ranch. They're out there in the dunes. They let us onto their land during the government shutdown, so we were able to continue our soils research. So thank you to them. They're not here today. But mainly, I want to thank Fred and Andrew for all of their help last summer. Without you guys, none of our research could have ever been possible. So thank you very much. Definition of groundwater sapping is on the screen, but really, what is it? It's a main process of just groundwater that is focused at a point. Here's a river on this diagram moving from right to left, and there's this meander bed where groundwater, these solid lines, are focused, and over time they become more focused and create tributaries, and just through focused groundwater you get sapping and bank failure, and over time you just get increased tributaries. And a macro scale process that this is unfortunately related to is the landslide that happened in Washington. You get focused groundwater and focused just a lot of water in one area, and you get bank failure, and that's kind of a similar process that you can see during groundwater sapping. But it's also a universal process. Universally, there's evidence on Mars of groundwater sapping processes, and it's really hard for us to know if this is truly groundwater sapping, because we're not there. We're not there to see if there's actually groundwater within the Martian surface. But at the same time, just recently in March, the Mars orbiter found a new goalie that it's really hard to say. It could be sediment flow, it could be from an impact crater that just caused sediment to flow down a steep hill. But this is what's really cool about it, because we don't know, and we're not up there to see if this is truly groundwater sapping or if it is just an impact crater causing sediment flow on a steep slope. Little Spring Creek is located 6 miles west of the visitor center. A visitor center is right in this area. These loops right here are the campgrounds, and it's right at the boundary of sand sheet, which is this bluish gray area, and meadow, which is just highly vegetated. Bison hang out over there. It's really cool. There's excellent soil development, which Adam will talk about here in a little bit, and it's one of 13 monitored streams within the park. And it's thought that water from Medno Creek wraps around the dune front here, infiltrates into the substrate, and moves at fast velocities, that hydraulic conductivity that was spoken about in the previous talk, at very high rates, and reemerges right at this boundary of sand sheet and meadow. My first approach with the help of Andrew is that we went out there to the headwaters of Little Spring Creek and we mapped where there's greater headward erosion versus lateral erosion. This is an important method because headward erosion makes the channel length longer, whereas lateral erosion makes the stream wider. And I really needed to know what I was dealing with and where the boundary for greater headward erosion and lateral erosion was, just to orient myself really along the creek. I also used some park LiDAR data, which is just light that's reflected off of the Earth's surface to create a high resolution image, and you'll see some of that in a little bit. I also used some historic well data, and I had the opportunity to help hand dig a well. One of my first methods was that between these two red arrows here, about 275 feet, I measured 38 points with a total station to get a location and elevation of the surface of the creek, as well as I dug down to the water table, stuck an M-scope down there, which is a way to measure groundwater. It beeps when it hits the water, and I mapped it against the groundwater right here. And I do want to point out my vertical exaggeration. The headwaters doesn't have very much water within it, and in order to make this diagram really able to be seen, I needed a great vertical exaggeration. The average groundwater depth in this area is 4.5 feet. With that park LiDAR data that I mentioned earlier, which is in the background, I created this headward erosion potential map. You have to kind of really look at this. This bright orange area right here is the sand sheet, and this area over here is the meadow. And these wells right here are just monitoring wells that I use some of that well data from. And to me, it appears that there's some low relief areas in here, and with sapping processes, this creek could potentially move in up direction, which in this case would be east, northeast direction. And that well that I mentioned that I got to dig earlier, well U1. Well U, we found, was 30 feet beneath the dune. Dunes move, and that doesn't do us any good. So that's well U1 right there that I helped Andrew dig. I also created a groundwater flow map, and these lines are elevation lines the elevation at which the water is beneath the surface. And water always flows perpendicular to these elevation lines. And so here's well U1 again to complete that flow gradient. Water is just moving from right to left in this general direction. So Adam is going to definitely get more into this, but a few things I want to point out in our transition between water and soils is that there's several horizons within a soil strat column that I just want people to keep in mind during Adam's talk. The A horizon can be thought of as the topsoil, the surface horizon. And then the BK horizon, which Adam will get more in depth into in a little bit, is the horizon directly beneath that. And while we were out there doing soils, we discovered a potential buried A horizon, which is this very dark, thick horizon right in there, which Adam is going to take over for.
Okay, hope everybody can bear with me a little bit. I'm feeling a little under the weather. Volume might be an issue. So hopefully you can hear me in the back. Basically what started this all off, started off with some summer reading, just kind of getting prepped for soils class with Dr. Beaton in the fall. And that sort of reading and everything we were going through leading up to our soils project, kind of everything all sort of meshed together. And kind of kept our attention on this, and Katie and I got talking about it, decided to put our approaches together and try to go about this from one thing. The reason, as it says, this stuff is really interesting, the reason for that, if you can get a good description of the soil sequence, of the sequence in which the soils were put together, when they developed, under what conditions they developed, all the way up to the top, you can put together a pretty good definition of, a pretty good description rather, of what the environment was like thousands and thousands of years ago, which can give you really a very solid implication as to whether or not there used to be life there, human habitation, animal habitation, whatever. And that's kind of, the soil development and geoarchaeology are kind of where my interest lies. So it seemed to be, with that in the headwaters, it seemed to be a good way of going about it. Our methods were pretty simple. Just going to go over them real quick. As far as collection techniques, most of what we did was along cut banks along the river, much like you see through here. There it is. This is all a result of obviously higher river levels. These things cutting back through the soil. So we went with the cut banks, and we would go through, clear off the outside layer, which has been, weathered and affected by various processes, to get to the better soils behind there, the actual representative soils. Take a sample of them, bag it, mark it with a field designation. In this case, for example, our first site we would have labeled LSC 1A for A horizon at first. Excuse me, at the first site. We'll be going over some of the results of the lab techniques, some of the archaeological stuff that we found. Sorry. So essentially, 4 sample sites we went through. Took coordinates at each one with handheld GPS, logged all that. And we were planning on doing, as you can see, percent carbon, hydrometer, soil moisture, and litmus pH. And going into percent organics, for this one we decided to do A horizons on everything, being that those are generally higher in organic content than most of the other horizons. And we decided to throw in the AB horizon on the buried A horizon on the 4th site in order to give us something to compare it to. And also to kind of get a feel for whether or not that might actually be a potential buried A horizon. A buried A horizon, simply put, is just at one time that was an A horizon, and the depositional setting changed so fast that it just got buried as is without having time to really change at all. Sites 1 and 2 over here were both taken from the headwaters of Low Spring Creek and showed a greater percentage of organics than site 3 and site 4, which didn't surprise us. Being at the headwaters, there's less actual water flow, there's less opportunity for it to transport material downstream. The AB horizon was a little bit surprising in that we knew it would, well, we assumed that it would have high organic content as well. We just didn't think it would come in quite as high as it did. And lab technique we utilized for this is called the loss on ignition method. Essentially, you measure out a sample of the soil, you throw it in a furnace and just burn off the carbon, do a little bit of math, and figure out exactly how much was in there. Excuse me. We went through and checked one from each with the hydrometer method. Basically, you take a bunch of soil and make really thin, essentially really thin mud out of it. And the hydrometer looks like a thermometer with a bulb on the end of it, and you just kind of float it in there and read the specific gravity, record the temperature, do a little math, and you get your percentages over time. We expected a high degree of sand throughout all 4 sites, and we were not disappointed. We did, in the second site here, we did a B horizon, a BG horizon specifically, which refers to a secondary soil horizon with a high clay content. And we expected a good deal more clay than we got. So that was a little surprising, but all the secondary markers were there, so we're still confident calling it a clay horizon. The amount of silt also in the AB was slightly surprising, but only as to the matter of degree. We had assumed about half of that, especially given the higher organic content. We figured we were gonna see more silt, but again, the actual degree of it kind of surprised us just a little bit. Soil moisture content we ran on all of our samples, in all of them. The technique for that is really very simple. You put it in a beaker, you weigh the beaker, you weigh the amount of soil, throw it in an oven for a little while and let it cook off. You reweigh it, do a little math, and you know how much moisture you have. Most of them are just about what we expected. With all of it, we expected the 8 horizons along each one to be, the highest among the series. And for the most part, they were, with the exception of the BK horizon, which again was kind of surprising. A BK horizon is a very common thing here in the valley. It's a B horizon with a high degree of carbonate content. It's usually seen in desert sands, aerosols, the kind of thing that we see all throughout the San Luis Valley. It just, through leaching and such, it just collects carbonates and it becomes a BK horizon. That one was a little bit surprising to us. We're not entirely sure how that came out that way. We would like to work on some more sites in the future and try to, correlate it with other BKs and see what we can do. pH, again, other than that BK horizon, this came out basically how we expected. We expected the higher pHs to come out at the top of the series, and for the most part, things to die down. But this 3 and 4, both of them BKs show a little bit higher, which not terribly surprising, but we don't really have any way to explain that exact, degree of change. And again, that's something we'd like to correlate with future research with more sites and see exactly if we can come up with anything. Soil stratigraphy, this is basically, site 1, 2, 3, and 4, what we found through there. The A horizons were fairly uniform. The B horizons, you can kind of see how they change out. This was, site 1 was at the headwaters, so there was no development of an AB or the inferred BO there. You can see them getting a little bit more pronounced as we go up. The exact reason for that with 4 sites, we aren't really able to determine. We just don't have enough data points on it. So, putting this down quickly, we look like we're running out of time. Given the setups, there's strong evidence for paleo wetland. Specifically, there's a lot of root casts in the A and B horizons that have been exposed to significant water and are partially oxidized. The reduxomorphic layer shows, speaks to a varying water table over a significant period of time. It'll go up, it'll go down, and it'll show the effects of that. The potential AB horizon speaks heavily towards a good possibility of there being a stable environment long enough for there to be human habitation, especially given the variable water table, the less arid environment that speaks to. And as we were going through, we had, on the way there, we had a little mishap, overshot the site, and about a third or a quarter mile away, we found significant little arrowhead pieces and pottery shards and things like that. So there's a good chance that there are cultural sites nearby. Real quick on the conclusions for the soils. It's mostly aerosols out there, as you would expect. The BK horizon is, again, to be expected. It's very, very common in this sort of environment. There is definite chance of cultural sites nearby, in my opinion. I'll make sure Katie has a minute to finish hers up, because I'm yapping too long.
And back to groundwater sapping. Through all of our soils and through all of our tests that we ran, I really concluded that soils appear to increase in age the further you get away from the headwaters, which suggests headward erosion. Because if you have active erosion, you're not going to have that stability to create the stable vegetation and the stable soils. And there's current active bake enlargement, and really I'd like to get back out there and just collect more data and rerun some of my tests just to, conclude all of this new research on Little Spring Creek. All of our references. And thank you very much. Fred.
Katie, had a nice presentation.
Thank you.
Questions I have is, you said more data. Are there any, more same type of data, or are there any other techniques that you would like to explore with?
More techniques. I would like to do some carbon-14 dating on our buried horizon, because that's really the defining factor for a buried horizon is the organic carbon-14 content within that. Because right now, one of our hypotheses is that it's a lacustrine setting or a lake sediment that was rapidly buried and not necessarily a buried horizon, because it is very thick and very sudden. And with a buried soil horizon, it's more gradational in the change.
So carbon dating.
Carbon dating, yes.
If I can have a follow-up. How did you choose those 4 sites?
Basically, we wanted 2 sites along Little Spring Creek, and we wanted 2 sites along the irrigation canal that have been dug in there to be able to kind of compare and contrast the 4 different sites and 4 different, the 2 different settings at 2 different points each.
Okay.
Just to kind of get
So
a
paired.
yeah.
Okay.
And a problem we had at the headwaters is that it's very highly vegetative, and we couldn't really get down into the creek to get a good soil strat presentation of what we were looking at. Ben?
You spoke more of the expansion or the widening of the channel. Were you able to get any information or data from the actual headward erosion portion of this? Is the migration upstream, or how fast the migration is upstream?
No, I have not. That's definitely a future goal to figure out the migration rate of the creek. I just don't know how to do that.
Anybody else?
Thank you very much.